guys, it's Colby here, and today we'll be going through what makes SVs and CVs good ships in PvP. So the first thing I want to talk about is how this video is going to be formatted. First we're going to go look at the SVs, and then we'll take a look at the CVs. For every ship, we'll be looking at its cost in iron as a metric for how big it is, its handling, its speed, its pros in terms of what it can do, what it can't do in the terms of PvP, and you'll see right off the bat it's using inferior components to most other SVs, and you'll see what I'm talking about later once we get into the other ships. So now let's take a look at its pros. Its pros, it looks super nice. I mean, if I was just looking at this and I wanted a screenshot, this would be a decent ship to take a screenshot of. It's got wing blocks, its guns are nicely laid out, it's got this nice little open cockpit with windows that you can see that I've broken open a couple times. The color's a little bit different. Its thrusters look nice, they're in nice positions. It's got lights, and that's about all it's got going for it in the pros. In its cons, it does not have a very good weapons complement. It's using a total of 6 weapons. It's not using the full amount of homing rockets, which right now are arguably the best gun in the game throughout, mainly base homing rockets and CV homing rockets, but they're relatively good on SVs. So it does not have a full complement of guns. Now I'm not saying you need to just stick the full amount of every gun on an SV, but you need to have a decent amount. That way, you know, you get shot at, your devices go away, they have the least amount of health. It's what things target first, they stick out, then you have some backups. Another con, it's using wing blocks. These wing blocks take up a lot of space, and they don't have enough health for it. So if we take a look at this wing block, it's got 500 HP. Now if we go over here, and we're not going to do any real scientific testing, but check how many blocks it would use in this whole wing, and then I want you to add up all that health. Now these are steel, so we'll use hard steel because there's no way you should be using obviously steel in a PvP build. But if we just was able to move those blocks, we'd have well over 500 HP for this area. Will it look as nice? Maybe not. Maybe if you're really skilled with using blocks and how their different shapes are, maybe you could get it to look nice or nicer. But for right now, it's more or less utility over form. Another thing that's terrible about this, all of its devices in regards to its movability, its thrusters and stuff, are all outside. None of them are encased. Now I'm not saying to encase everything, obviously it'd be super hard to encase this huge jet engine block. My advice to you is only use the 1x3x1, the smallest jet thrusters you can, and adding more of them. You'll get there, trust me. I don't want to showcase my best design, but it doesn't use more than 10 of those in any direction. It is very maneuverable and very fast. You guys will see it later if you ever come up against my faction fighting, but I digress. All of its thrusters are on the outside. They're all easily accessible to be shot. None of them are even covered up with vents or something if you want to make it look a little bit nicer than just using blocks to cover them up with. They're the first thing that's going to get taken out by a base that's set to shoot at thrusters or devices, or even another player if their aim is good enough. On to another thing that's super bad about this ship is open cockpits. Now I understand the appeal of an open cockpit, it looks nice, and what I was saying before about wing blocks and health per area, obviously more windows is going to have more health per area, but what if one of these windows gets shot open, right? You're going to fight this, your cockpit's right up front, which it also shouldn't be. Its cockpit's right up front, and this window gets shot out, right? It's gone. You now no longer have a sealed cabin. Now maybe you're smart and you've got your EVA suit on and everything's good, but you don't have O2, so once your O2 and your suit runs out, if it's a longer fight, you're dead, and he didn't even have to kill you, he just killed a single block. That's the way it is on most of this ship, which is another huge con. Is its armor. It's using 1 to 1.5 blocks, and it's using subpar armor blocks like regular steel instead of hardened to encase it. In my opinion, you need to have at least 2 layers of steel, and this is for any ship, including CVs, obviously use the highest grade of bases, but 2 layers between your outermost device, so like an RCS or an engine, and the outside environment like space or whatever you're fighting in. Lastly, look at how terribly managed this is. Waste of space. Cargo boxes are not needed on a fighter style. Obviously this wasn't meant to fight, but cargo boxes aren't needed, and they have no space between all their devices. If one rocket got through this back door, it would chain react all of these devices, and the whole ship would be gone. And all that takes is a single volley of homing rockets, or even regular rockets, maybe a railgun or plasma. It doesn't matter. The point is that you should never group up all your components into one place. Spread them out, and you will see that in the other ships that they're relatively spread out. They've got some armor between layers of them, so that if an explosion does happen, it damages the block instead of the component that it's next to. And that wraps it up for this ship. I do not, obviously this is the worst case scenario. You should just never, if you see anything like this on the workshop, if you see anything like this, you're building it, you need to restart. Not trying to be harsh, but if you really want to make it, you need to restart your design and go from scratch. On to the brick. This design costs about 2.3k iron, and it was designed by an old friend of mine that used to play Empyrion. This was designed way back in probably the 2.0 days, if I'm recalling correctly, so it's a little out of date, but the reason I'm showing it to you is not because it's out of date, and it obviously would not make a good ship in today's Empyrion update status, but because of how it was designed by then, is still the way you want to design SVs today. If we take a look at it, its weapon complement is relatively full for turret limit server. It's got 4 homing rockets, it's using Gatlings and pulses and regular rockets. It's got docking pads, it's got thrusters. You can see that they're encased here. If we take off a block, you'll see a thruster, but it at least has 1 layer of armor. You'll notice that there is no cockpit on it, or that you think that there's no cockpit. It's in the very back here. There's a little open slot that you can get in the cockpit. Obviously, you can't see in first person. In PvP, you do want to be switching between the two views depending on whether you're trying to get behind the other player or you're already behind them due to the way aiming works. When you're behind the other player and shooting at them, you want to be in first person, it's more accurate, and when you're trying to chase them down or get behind them, you want to be in third. This CV only lets you shoot in third person. It's not the best, but it's better than an upfront cockpit like the piece of shit had. It's very protected, it's very hard to take the cockpit out or kill you through the cockpit in this design. So going into its handling and its speed, this thing handles like a brick, hence its name. It's almost as bad as the other ship, it's not quite as bad, but it would not fare well in today's world of well-built SVs. It is a little slow, like I said, it's using old thruster blocks like the other ship was. It's not designed with the jet thrusters, it was never updated. So we're going to ignore that, and this is not what you should be doing. But the real reason we're going to look at this is how it's laid out on the inside. If I start stripping off blocks, you'll notice that there's several layers of armor where there's just nothing here. It's not jam-packed full of devices, it's not lacking of space, it just kind of is. Unfortunately with this one, all of its devices are sort of clustered up, but they are in the center, and the only vulnerable part of the ship that you would be able to really get to these devices from easily is from the underbelly. And obviously if you've designed your ship, you know its weaknesses, you'll be able to kind of countermand that. However, what I do want to say is that there is a nice spread of these, so part of this ship can just come off, this whole right wing can be gone, and the ship will still fly and maneuver well, which is something that you need to think of that we call redundancy. A ship should always be redundant when you're building it. Now I like to use the mirror tool, so you hit N, you hit your YZ plane, you got a block in your hand, you click on it while that's open, and it creates a little nice mirror. Now this will help with your redundancy. Obviously if you're placing one item on one side, it's placing the exact same mirror on the other side of the ship. This helps with if you're losing parts of your ship, you're still going to be able to fly relatively well because the other guy should be losing parts of his while you're fighting, and it'll basically help with losing parts of your ship. Now I try to design my ships to the point where if they're missing up to 2/3 of the ship should still be able to fly and shoot at the other person and have ammo areas in there. Now whether I did my due diligence and fill those ammo boxes up is another question. However, it still should be able to move around and maybe get a couple shots off. So we're going to wrap this shit up with, don't design a ship with these closed thrusters like this. It needs more RCSs returning. However, it's got the right idea where it's encasing its devices in multiple layers of steel. It's got many layers before you even get to it. If we consider this wing or even the outside layer, it took 2 or 3 blocks for me to get to these. The only cons with this ship is its handling and speed are subpar due to its inferior components, and they have not been updated, as well as the fact that it's clustered most of its devices up in the center here. So if the shot does manage to start getting through armor, they put a big hole in you like the hole I put with the multi-tool and start shooting, you're going to be pretty much done. Now, onto the ship that I'm going to call Decent. This is a ship's design that my faction took from another faction. They called it the YB3. We've updated it a little bit and changed some things around with it to make it good for the server in 6.0. The ship costs around 3k iron. Its handling is much better than the brick, but still not up to standards that I would say. As you'll see, if you want to rewind the video or you've committed parts to memory, you'll see that it handles much better compared to the other two ships. Its speed and acceleration is much better. It stops much quicker. I was able to reverse from 60 meters per second there to a backward 60 meters per second in a relatively quick time. It's still lacking a little bit. This has also not really been updated too much with the new jet designs, as they are a little larger, and this was designed with other thrusters in mind. So unless we wanted to really expand upon its wings and make another layer or two bigger, we weren't able to incorporate that. So if we go to its pros, if we look at the weapon complement, it spread its weapons out nicely, so not shots in one direction can't take all of its weapons out. It's using homing rockets, gatlings, and rockets. They are good, although what I do have to say about its weapons is it probably should be using at least pulse lasers or railguns as another quick shooting hit scan weapon like the Gatling guns are. It is multi-layered. We can go through sections of the wing and only come to some devices. Now what I want to say about this, as well as getting to the brick, is this ship does a very good job of putting its devices away from each other. Now obviously I didn't do a good showing of that running into 4 devices grouped up, but if we go into the control panel, and this one is missing some stuff, this is an older design that was damaged, we can see that it's got 23 RCSs and 12 generators. This ship will never need that many generators, as we can see. If we go to statistics, actually it might be better. Yeah, max output is 21.6 megawatts, max consumption is 186. That's consumption right now, but it's never going to get to that consumption, and if you really want to do the math on it, you can go ahead and add it all up. But the point is that it is redundant, so even if you do get to these nice little clusters where these devices are a little stacked up, you only take out a couple of what's actually needed to fly this thing. And now that you're seeing me clear way more blocks, we're getting to the point that I was trying to get to, where things are separated. This thruster could have been right next to these generators, but it wasn't. It's a couple blocks away, it's got a couple layers of armor between it, and most importantly, it's got layers of armor between the back. And that's about it for this ship. It's really cons is that it's not updated with the new jet engines. The reason I'm stressing those so much is they are super good compared to these other thrusters that you can get, the tier 1 thrusters, whatever you guys want to call them by. Those thrusters are very heavy in comparison to the jet engines, and they don't put out enough power to be worth their smaller size impact with the extra block and height that the jet engines take up. So with a quick wrap up, what we're going to talk about is what makes a ship good for PvP. One, you need to have a good weapons complement with backup weapons in case the ones that you enjoy using or you think are the best get shot out of the ship, because damage will happen. Do not account for your ship to be at full health all the time. 2, make sure your ship handles well. You need to have enough RCSs for you to be able to comfortably turn with your mouse without cranking it several times and picking up off your mouse pad. 3, you need to have good speed. You need to be able to accelerate and decelerate fast, and most of that is for when you're turning around, trying to get behind somebody, performing loops, and also when you're scouting. You don't want to be running around, and the next thing you know, there's a base 200 meters to your left, and homing rockets are at you. You need to be able to get out of there quickly before they take out your ship. You need to make sure that your ship is armored correctly. Always use a hardened steel, and consistently make sure that there's at least 2 layers of steel between the outermost device and the outside environment. That way they have to go through a little bit before they get to at least your first devices. And lastly, make sure that your cockpit has some sort of protection. Don't do what the piece of shit did and leave it kind of open and it's super easy to pick you out of or even just kill you through the environment. Don't do what the brick did and fully enclose yourself in steel so that you can't see shit if you're trying to look first person. The Decent does that as well. I did forget to go over that in its review, but I'm sure you guys, without me giving away too much of my designs and stuff like that, can figure out how to make a cockpit that is armored as well as able to see third and first person correctly. That's all for SVs, guys. In the rest of the video, we'll be going over the CVs and what makes a CV good for PvP. For the second part of our video today, we will be going through CVs and what makes them good for PvP. We have another lineup of 3 ships, the piece of shit number 2, the Decent, and the Flying Dutchman, which is my own personal design and is what my faction KMC uses in most of our fights. Now this version of the Flying Dutchman is a little outdated. It is on the weaker side, so as you guys will not be getting, obviously looking through the video, being able to recreate our best ships, but I am throwing you a bone and giving you a ship that is used for PvP currently by our faction. So I hope you guys appreciate that. Starting with the piece of shit, this ship is gotten off the workshop, which is the first thing you will note about this video is that I will constantly slam workshop ships. Workshop ships are pieces of shit. People that are serious about PvP will not upload their designs to there without them being private or viewed to their friends only who are carefully selected so they can't get PvP designs. Designs are usually guarded very closely so that nobody else can kind of steal them. So workshop designs are a general piece of crap, and the only time you should really be using them is if you're using bases for aesthetics, or you're gutting the ship and kind of redoing it but using the base layout because you like the look of it. So after that little tangent, let's move into the ship. This ship costs about 40k iron. One thing I want to note here is that the ship right next to it costs 23k iron and would beat the shit out of the ship in a fight. So iron cost is not everything. Size is good, but make sure you're building something correctly without just throwing things together and hoping that your size and amount of iron that you threw into a ship will outclass the other guy. So it is made of combat steel, and as I say that I look at hardened steel blocks, so it is a gradient of both. Not a good thing. You should be using full combat steel for anything that you think will ever see the light of day in combat, and be trying to take some shots. Its handling and speed we're not really going to pay too much attention to, as this is kind of the worst case scenario, but I will go over it. The ship is extremely fucking slow, and pardon my French, but it is just terrible. This will never fly on a planet or even in space. The other players will fly circles around you and get behind you to the point where your front weapons, which are minimal, as you can see, 2 rocket pods instead of the full complement of weapons, is terrible. Now, one thing good about this ship is it does turn extremely well. They did do a good job with the RCS turning, as you can see. I'm turning relatively easily. I'm only moving my mouse about 4 to 5 inches in either direction with these turns. That's decent. It's not the best I've seen, but it's not terrible and is perfectly serviceable in a fight. So if we move on to its pros, it is made out of combat steel. That is the one thing it has going for it. It looks nice. It has a decent turn count, looking like it's trying to use its full complement of homing rockets, flaks, and artilleries. And that's about all it really has going for it. And you'll note that all the pieces of shit pretty much have nothing going for them in these videos. On to its cons. It is not using any plasma turrets. The plasma turret, the high damage one, I forget the name of it compared to the other one. I think one's plasma turret, one's pulse cannon. The plasma turret is like another artillery turret, except you can have 4 of them. They do a little, probably about half damage. I think they're 1300 compared to the 22 or 2300 of the artillery cannon, but they shoot faster. Their projectile speed is much greater than the artillery cannon, and they're just extra strength turrets that you can add to your build. They only cost, they cost the rest from Sikosum, but when we're looking at endgame PvP, that should not be a concern. So it is missing those, which in my opinion is a huge disappointment. Those are high damage output weapons, just like the homing rockets and flak are, and they should be included in every build. Something else to note that it doesn't have is it has no pulse lasers, and it's not even using its full complement of rocket pods. You should always be using full complements of weapons on ships designed for combat. There is no reason not to. Getting into its other thing is it has this hangar bay right in front. Never do that, and that should be relatively self-explanatory. It's easily popped open now as landings and, kind of raiding ships as they move along isn't a thing. This is still a very large hole in your ship that isn't armored and gives a lot of leeway. If this was just a full filled in area and maybe your hangar was in your back or just a bottom bay, somewhere more discreet and hard to hit, there's an extra at least 10 or 12 layers blocks worth of steel that could go here. That would make it super hard when trying to punch through the front of your ship. The side that you're aiming with the most and where you're going to take the most damage in a fight generally is the front. So your front needs to be heavily armored. Another con is just like that other SV that was a piece of shit, it's got its thrusters exposed. Now some people are going to want to play the long game and keep their thrusters unexposed for when they inevitably add damage for the thruster blocks when they're on and near blocks, but for now they don't cause damage and there's no issue covering them up with at least grades if you really want your aesthetic. However, these are super front and center. They're very small thrusters, which is not good. You should be using mostly blue and red thrusters, the 2 biggest ones in your designs, and yes, they take up a lot of space, but you will need a lot less of them. They have more health and they have a lot better force to mass ratio than these tiny ones do. More thrusters that are exposed. Back thrusters are all exposed. Just like the SV, it's got this little cockpit design. Now this is kind of cool. These shutters kind of act as an emergency armor, but as you can see, they have 100 hit points. that's peanuts compared to the 2,000 steel that you can be having, or even the 1,000 with the armored windows. So like the other one, if you pop open one of these windows, this whole area depressurizes, and you will die to the environment without the other guy even having to kill most of your ship. If we go through the ship in God mode and just kind of take a look around, it's got farms, something that we should never see in a combat ship, as plots are a device, and plants that grow on them also counts as devices, so you are needlessly using device counts, slowing down your frame rate for minimal gain. If you really are worried about food, put a single fridge on your ship and fill it before you go into a fight. Its warp drive is pretty well hidden. It's got glass in front of it. I mean, it should be armored glass just for the sake of things, but at least you know if it's been shot and killed, and you can kind of get to it. It's got a terrible color scheme. It's got a little bit of redundancy with 2 generators, the tier 2s, which should be more than enough power. I think these are tier 2s. They are. One tier 2 is usually more than enough power for any single extremely large ship. I've seen ships that are up to 300k iron powered off one large generator. They just output so much power. However, if that goes in a fight, gets killed, you will need a second to back up. So having backups is always good. Its fuel tanks are spread out, which is good. You don't want one shot, lag shot, or wave damage, or just a general hole opened into your fuel line. They blow it up and chain explosions kill the rest of them. You want to kind of separate your stuff out a little bit, just like with the SVs. The ship does a decent job with that. It's nothing great, but it's not the worst I've ever seen. I've seen groups of components because people just throw them in there as a last thought. This is relatively good. However, that's about all there is to that ship. The only good thing about it was it spaced its devices relatively well. It looks nice, and that was really about it. And then it used combat steel instead of hardened steel, which is what you will find on a majority of ships in the workshop for whatever reason. Alright, moving on to the decent. This ship costs about 23k iron. Its handling and speed are relatively good. Oh, let's fly past some things there. If we look at its handling, it's relatively close to the other ship that we reviewed, the piece of shit. So nothing bad there. It looks like its thrusters are off. Yeah, so let's quickly turn those on so we can kind of look at how fast this thing can speed up and slow down. So it is relatively slow to speed up and relatively slow to slow down, for as much sense as that makes, so its thrusters aren't great. That is something this ship lacks, as well as the piece of shit, so they're both kind of same in the speed and handling category. On to its pros. This ship does manage to use its full complement of frontal-facing weaponry, the pulse lasers, and the rocket pods. It is made fully out of combat steel. This is another ship that was kind of tweaked by one of our members, so I do kind of know it a little bit better than the other ships. You can see that it has very few thrusters that are exposed. If you paid attention to the thruster numbers in the beginning, it probably has only about 1/4 of its total number of thrusters exposed to the outside environment. The rest are all covered up. It is using most of its full complement of turrets, including the plasma turrets, which are a little bit like the artillery in how they operate and how much damage they do. It's got its hangar door facing out the back, and it's in a non-critical section. If this wing were to disappear, if we go quickly through it, it's pretty much combat steel and a couple thrusters. If this whole wing got shot off, all you lose is your hangar, and that's it. So that is a very good aspect of this ship. If we go into the inside and try and look around to its components, it's got a lot of its warp stuff in the same area as well as its core. It's relatively centered. A lot of its fuel lines are up front. They are spaced decently. If we go ahead and look through here, they have at least one layer of blocks between a couple of them, which is good. However, its fuel lines being up front and center, and only, if you take this out, one block away from the environment is not good. That is something you should avoid. Like with SVs, at least 2 layers, but for combat CVs, you should be having more layers than that, as they will take a lot of punishment in space, with artillery doing a full combat steel's worth of health damage and plasmas doing relatively close to 3/4 of that. So its ammo is up front, which is a terrible design. Your front is one of the first things to go when you get shot at, especially back in the days when this was designed of CV shooting on planet. You were relatively angled towards turrets, so the first thing that would go is your front facing weapons. and whatever you had in the front. So that should generally be armor. That still holds true today when you're facing off against other ships. Your front weapons will be the first thing to go, as well as your front turrets and whatever armor you have in the front. So keep that in mind when you're building your ship. The ship is relatively redundant though, with both sides having lots of fuel tanks, more than the ship would ever need. Lots of O2 tanks, a decent amount of ammo boxes. I would have more in here and spread them out a little bit towards the back and center more. It's got a lot of generators so that even if a couple die, it's still good to go. I'm sure this tier 1 large is more than enough to power the whole ship. Those 2 tier 1 larges in the front go. Most of its crucial systems, the life maintaining systems, are a little bit towards the back though. And that's about all for this ship. It is lightly armored. This is not by any means a very good, I guess is the way I have to say it for lack of a better word, PvP ship. This is not something you're going to take into a battle where you expect the other guys to have multiple ships or to have superior firepower. You would take this ship for scouting or for just a quick combat. You may face combat, you may not, but you're not willing to lose stuff. Real quickly, as I digress, this does have another one of those open cockpit designs, something that is not good with 6.0. When this was designed at 4.5 or 5.0, whenever that was, this was decent. I mean, you lost a little bit of health here with these blocks compared to combat steel, but it still lets you view first person as opposed to only third. And since temperature and oxygen didn't matter, oxygen was given through the seat rather than through the air, it was fine if a couple of blocks near the cockpit got blown up. On to the Flying Dutchman. This design is one of my own and has been with me since 1.2 in some form or another. It's been heavily modified throughout its days. This is one of the lower levels, so that's why I'm showing it to you. And this is what you should kind of be aiming for when you're looking for a decent fighting ship that you kind of plan to take into wars with other factions and things like that. So let's go through its cost in iron. This ship costs around 60 to 65 depending on the version of this version of the ship. And I know it sounds weird, but there's lots of versions of the Dutchman sitting in my blueprints. So it's about 60k iron. Its handling and speed, we'll go through that real quick. We'll go to the top level cockpit. There's another one in the center for some redundancy, as well as this one's a nice view, but it can be shot out relatively quickly. So I'm only moving my mouse about 2 to 3 inches here for these turns. So as you can tell, it handles much better than the other two. I would probably say around 1.5 to 2 times better. Its speed is relatively fast. Its slowing down speed is this version's weakness compared to its speed up. You can see if you rewatch the how it's slowed down with no thruster input from the front, no thruster input from the back as I'm going back and forth. You can kind of see how it handles. This is kind of what you can expect from this review of this ship. This is the baseline that we use in my faction, who has combined over 3,000 hours of PvP experience and has been the main. What I mean by main is the faction that kind of everyone wants to kill because we're quote-unquote the best faction in a 70-person server. That server's died out, which is why we have a new one. Back to the topic at hand, this is what you need to be looking at as a baseline for your ship, because it's what we look at, and we've had a lot of success using designs like this with the criteria that this design meets when we're building ships. So let's start with its pros, as we've already gone over its handling and speed. So for its pros, I can tell you without even going through it, it is a full combat steel design. It's got many layers between the front part of the ship, some of these components, and until you finally get to what starts to get into more of essential components here. So I believe last time I counted it was around 10 if we go from the longest point out here, so like from this point into what I would call critical systems. There's redundancies for gravity and O2 here, so this is where I start calling critical systems. We get into its ammo boxes and into an open area. It's about 10 layers of combat steel. Now it's not always full, as you can tell. There's some space here for other reasons that you guys will find out later, not in this video. And that is something that's very important, is the number of layers of combat steel you have between your point that's going to take the most damage. If we come over to the sides and we start going through these areas, there isn't as many, just remembering the design layout of this ship a little bit better, there isn't as many layers between this outsidemost edge and where you see some devices. However, there's a lot of white space, and these sides are not really going to take too much damage, and it's going to get spread out due to the way the ripple effect, I'm going to call it, of the side is built. And back to guns, it's got a full complement of guns. This is running, I believe, the full 34 turrets. If we go ahead and take a quick look. Actually, it's not. It's running a 26 turret limit. I think I deleted, yeah. So there's not as many miniguns and not as many cannon turrets as you would normally see on, actually this is the unupdated design. I'm sorry guys, I'm thinking of another ship. This ship is running full cannon and minigun. It is not running any plasmas, so that is a con of this ship. When it was redesigned, it did not incorporate the plasmas when we moved from a turret without turret limits to a turret limit server. It does, however, have its full complement of front guns. Its hangar is in a nice concealed area up here. It's got a layer in front of it, so it can't be bulldozed through, and it would be super hard to kind of hit it from the side. So its hangar is relatively nice and concealed. It's relatively roomy. There's some extra fuel tanks there that are just kind of placed there to have extra redundancy. One con is it does have these open thruster areas, and there's a missing block. Ignore that. It has these open thrusters on both sides, so those are extremely easy to kill. It's just for some added speed there, and no needs necessary to the ship design. It does have two cockpits, as you saw. It's got the one up here. If we head down, it's got the one in the middle here for redundancy. Kind of whichever one used goes down to user preference. Some people don't mind the chance of dying up here with the exposed area. However, some people do like to see first person, which is why they use up here rather than in the center where you can only use third, but you are much more protected. It's relatively spaced out with its devices. If we kind of sit here, we can kind of glitch through and see everything. You can see that its RCSs are relatively spread out. Its thrusters are mirrored on both sides and spread out throughout the ship. It's got two fuel compartments, three if we count the some down in the hangar right here. It's got ammo redundancies through the side there and up in the front. And that's what I also want to talk about. It's got a lot of redundancies. It has 3 total tier 2 generators that are relatively well hidden and encased in combat steel. I think I've pretty much hit everything for the ship. Its warp drive is in the back here. You will note that there's no door or glass to see if it's been damaged. That was just a quick personal design. Actually, I lied. It's on the sides. Don't listen to me anymore. I can't remember my own ship designs. That's probably about it for this ship. You will notice another con. It does have some thrusters that are sort of exposed. These usually don't end up getting hurt in my experience, but they are not the most well guarded. Just like the ones on top aren't the most well guarded. Yes, these vents do have more health than a half block, so a wall walk of combat seal. They're 1200 compared to 1000, but they are relatively exposed and will get hit a lot of the time, which is why they're redundant systems all throughout the rest of the ship, which I won't go over in too much detail, so you don't know too much about my ship. I'm going to kind of get outside here. I don't think I'm missing too much on this ship. It is our baseline. Yes, it does have cons. It is by no means a perfect ship, or else I wouldn't be showing it to you. But it is what we use in my faction, and what I've seen other factions. They're trying to copy our design. They try to use the same kind of criteria. So, for our CV section, things that you need to keep in mind when you're building your CV. Number 1, full combat steel in multiple layers between the outermost environment layer and where your outermost device is. Now for SVs I said this was 2. For CVs you want to probably make it more like 3 or 4 if you're making something that you expect to be in heavy combat. Something that we saw the Dutchman do relatively well, with the piece of shit and the decent not doing too well. They need to handle and have decent acceleration. The handling on all these ships was relatively decent, and I wouldn't really knock any of them for their handling. However, the speed was subpar on all of them except for the Dutchman, who speeds up and slows down relatively well. This is important. You are not always in a drag race with the other person. You'd be able to move in arcs that are weird angles. It's not always a nice linear contest. So your speed up and slow down in every direction, north, south, east, west, your 3 dimensions needs to be very good for you to maintain a decent speed while chasing people who are trying to outmaneuver you. You need to make sure you have your full complement of front-facing weapons, which isn't very hard to do. It's a total of 10 for rocket pods and 6 pulse lasers. These limits are told to you in the constructor, and I believe the tech tree when you go ahead and research. The same should be said for your turrets. 34 turrets right now is the the stock limit if you use the max amount for every category. However, if you're really expecting your CV to fight, miniguns and cannons aren't going to do much. Yeah, the minigun is a hit scan, so it does shoot and hit the target right away as long as it was on target with its aiming, whereas the cannons will have travel time, so they're pretty much useless in space. The miniguns are a consistent source of damage versus SVs, but they're not really great against CVs, so if you're going to cut one for space, you cut the minigun. You cut the cannon first, then the minigun, and pulse lasers are similar to cannons, but they do a lot more damage and their travel bullet time is quicker, so you cut them last if you got to cut anything. So that's 18 total turrets out of 34, so there's, if my math is correct, please don't be wrong, Chris here, 16 turrets that, in my opinion, our damage output is very good. So at the very least, use homing rockets, flaks, the heavy plasmas, and the artillery on your ship if you're strapped for space. Make sure your thrusters are in good positions, that they're generally encased in armor, and that you have enough of them for your acceleration. We've already been over that. Spread your RCSs out. RCSs work like, if you're good with physics, they work with moments of torque is how the game physics actually handle them. So if you put all your moment of torque in one area, your ship will not turn as well, especially if it's a longer design like some of these are. You need to spread them out sort of in a cube kind of design, fill your space with them, put ones at each vertices of that cube if you do your ship that way, and that'll give you the best turning ratio. Obviously more than one is needed in each of those areas, but you get the point. Make sure your hangar is relatively concealed. Don't make it impossible and time consuming to get into when you're just trying to dock, but don't make it up front and center, wasting valuable space like is done here in the piece of shit. I think that's about it. Redundancy is the key word. If you have to take away anything from here, make sure your ship is redundant. That is the most important thing. This Dutchman can fly while cut in half. If your ship can't fly with at least 1/4 of it missing, or it's very compromised with 1/4 of it missing, it's not good enough for serious PvP, and you need to take it out for a couple fights and see what you need to improve on it, or you just need to scratch that design and restart, or make it bulkier with armor. One thing that I will stress with designs for SVs and CVs is make sure it's function over form. Yes, you may look like a flying brick, but my advice for that is use slope blocks. They are your friend. It makes your ship look nice. They're relatively easy to use well, and they have the same health as a full steel block. So if you're having trouble making your ship not look like a flying brick, try and use some of these rounded edge blocks like are used here, or the slope blocks that are used right here on this ship. As you can see, these are relatively simple designs, but they all look decent enough. They may not win any beauty pageants, but they'll do the job that was given to them with fighting, or at least a decent Flying Dutchman will, and they look good enough so that somebody doesn't look at you and just see this flying rectangle going through space. That's all we have for this video. I hope that it helps your understanding of PvP and get a little bit more experience on the server through it. If you have any suggestions or comments, please PM me them in the Discord. Link is on the website.